We're here to talk about the books that we wish we had written, specifically our feelings about those books and our admiration and respect, obviously, but possibly also some not so warm and fuzzy feelings. Of course, talking about envy, which, as anybody with even a passing interest in the arts would know, has been the subject of and the product of numerous great works of art, including novels and plays and all sorts of things throughout human history. And today, to discuss the good, the bad, and possibly also the ugly of this topic, I have with me on the stage three very distinguished writers whose talents, I'm certain, have inspired the envy of many. To my left, we have Sonya Tsakalakis, who has the enviable professional title of bibliotherapist with the School of Life. You might have seen her at the Melbourne Writers' Festival a couple of months ago, or perhaps you have attended one of the reading circles she leads in community settings, or the literary salons she hosts as part of her social enterprise, The Literary Hand. To her left is Ramona Koval, who is a Melbourne writer, journalist, broadcaster and editor. You may have listened to her present Radio National's book show between 2006 and 2011, or read her work in many publications such as The Age, The Monthly or The Saturday Paper. She has also written numerous books, most recently Bloodhound, Searching for My Father, and By the Book, A Reader's Guide to Life. And on the far left, we have, or your right, Shane Maloney, who is an award-winning writer whose work you may have read also in many newspapers and magazines around the country. But he is most well known as the creator of the popular Australian crime novel series, the Murray Whelan novels. Please welcome our beautiful guests. So, on the face of it, literary envy is a pretty heavy topic. One that could inflame all sorts of psychic wounds, but I'd like to begin by thinking about a much more positive spin on the issue. I think everybody has, at some point in their lives, read a book and thought, I can't believe this thing exists. I wish I had written it. I wish I had come up with this idea. I wish I could put words together in this order and make it sound as good as this person does. I know I have read a few of those books, and there's a kind of fascinated longing, I think, that we feel when we read works like that. Something about the wonderful construction of art that we're seeing unfold on the page in front of us. So I want to ask my wonderful panellists, what books do you wish you had written and why? Sonya?
It took me a while to come up with... I had quite a selection, actually, and the common theme in all the books I'd chosen was the way they provoked me or the effect they had on my emotions. And the common denominator really was they traumatised me. They left a really indelible impression, and they loomed larger after reading them. And with time, instead of diminishing, they became quite large in my imagination. And the first book that came to mind is A Handful of Dust by Evelyn Waugh. And I read it with the expectation it was going to be a satire on the aristocracy in the interwar period, but I thought it was going to be a comedy. But I actually found it really dark, and it was full of pathos, and I was so disturbed by the characters and the way the story was going. And it begins with, for those of you who don't know the story, it's Brenda and Tony Last, and they're in this manor outside of London, and they have a child, and she's terminally bored, and then someone appears, John Beaver, an acquaintance, and he provides a diversion for Brenda, and then their lives take a sudden, and it sort of catapults and goes into all these directions, and I didn't anticipate it would take me to the places it did take me. And I envied that, the sense that I couldn't predict where it was going, and I envied the sense that I was so shocked. And there's a passage that I read, and when I read that passage, I remember the time and the place, and this was quite a few years where I read it. It's like when these key moments in history happen, you know exactly what you were doing and what you were feeling. And this is what happened when I read this particular passage in A Handful of Dust, and I reread it. I was in a state of disbelief. How could you come up with this character? How could she say such a thing? And I was trying to work through it. And so this would have to be probably A Handful of Dust would have to be the book that I wish I'd written for the prolonged emotional effect it's had on me.
Ramona, which books do you wish you'd written?
Well, I'm going to quibble with you a bit.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
First of all, yes, books that move you are the ones that are most memorable. And they move you at different times during different periods of your life. And therefore, something that moves you when you're 15, like Madame Bovary did for me, or that Colette's My Mother's House, Little Cedo, may not move me in the same way when I'm 40, except when you read it again, of course you're 15 again, and you light upon sentences that suddenly make you feel 15, and then you think when you're 40 or 60 or whatever, you sort of can interrogate what it was about those sentences that brought you to such emotional heights. And often it may not be the sentence itself, it's you. It's what you have been through or what you have been thinking or where you are. And for me, at the moment, because I'm starting to think about my next project, I'm really admiring of people who have written non-fiction that has moved me. And I'm thinking of Oliver Sacks, who died recently, and he was placed, because he was a doctor and a neurologist, he was placed in a hospital and in a place where people came to him and told him their stories and were open to him and were subject to him. And as a writer, it's a enviable place to be, I guess, where you have access to so many interesting stories, but also his sense of empathy was marvellous too, so that's why he could write about it. And so at the moment, Oliver Sacks or someone like Joseph Roth, who was a writer in the between the wars in Berlin, would write these tiny little pieces called feuds, and they would be for the newspaper, and there might be like 5 or 6 paragraphs, but there might be a description of an escalator that has just been put into this department store, or a train, or a place where a whole lot of refugees from the east have just come. And it's so touching, and it's so beautiful, and it's so well observed, and it's so empathetic that these are the people I'm admiring now. But the real book I wish I'd written is the one I'm writing now.
Yes, well. I think it's interesting you say that about people being in an enviable position to be able to write particular things. When I was thinking about this question myself, the book that I came up with was Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine, which is not it's not Harry Potter. This is a very hard book to read, and it took her a very long time to write, and it's meticulous. But really, what I envied was that ability to build an argument so carefully and to do all the research that goes into that. Something about the process, rather, the end product is amazing as well, but the process itself is something to be envied, I think, too. And we'll talk about that a bit later, I think. But Shane, I think we'd all like to know which books you wish you'd written.
Well, I'm going to quibble too.
Must be the old end of the panel.
Yes, I think quibble. Well, of course, you're both a reader and a writer. So as a reader, I see things quite often that I admire and think, God, I wish I could write like that. But at the same time, I could say, God, I wish I could play football like Tony Lockett, or I wish I could paint like Jimmy Pike. You recognise that they're doing something that is in another realm. It's when you become a writer, there's this, I suppose, a kind of implicit sense of competition, but it's not really a competition to write as beautifully or as well as someone else that you respect and admire. It's the competition to sell the books, you see, you know. So, you know, if I, there are, and I've got some examples of things that I could show you where I go, well, you know, that's fantastic. You know, if I read something and I really admire it, I go, well, wow, I enjoy that. That's fantastic. I will bask in the enjoyment. Now, what can I steal? You know, how did they make it work? Can I? And I mean, a small example of that I had was that before I'd published anything, in a kind of crime nature, I've got just an opening paragraph from an Elmore Leonard book when, and at the time I was reading, he was not kind of well known here, but he was, you know, he's famous for sort of this concision, this dry, you know, not a word wasted. And this is the first paragraph of a book called Cat Chaser that he published in 1982. And it goes like this. Moran's first impression of Nolan Tyner. He looked like a high risk, the kind of guy who falls asleep smoking in bed. No luggage except for a six-pack of beer on the counter and the Miami Herald folded under his arm. 39 words. Where are we? We're in a motel. There's a guy checking in. There are two people and we know the attitude of one to the other and we've got a sense of the style of the other. 39 words. You go, my God, I'll just slit my wrists now. You know, I mean, I'm not even going to try to bother. And of course, it ain't fancy. There's nothing fancy about that. You know, it is almost kind of flat. You know, and so certainly there are works, I think there are writers whose kind of style and so on that I admire, and so I suppose, you know, there's a kind of wish. But then there are other writers who have what I think in their lives, as distinct from their prose, are natural kind of advantages. And in the crime fiction world, James Ellroy, I really hate James Ellroy as a crime writer. I really hate him because he had these unfair advantages.
His mother got murdered.
His mother was murdered in a horrible sex crime, you know. I mean, you know...
Not everybody would think that's an advantage.
He said by the time he was 15, he was sort of living with his father in a cheap motel, making a life as a golf caddy and breaking...
And he was a peeping Tom.
Breaking into houses and stealing women's underwear and out of the medicine cabinet, the Benzodrex inhalers that people used to use to clear their heads and chewing them for the... And I thought, you know, of course he can write good crime. You know, falling off a log.
But, you know, Edna O'Brien said, if you're going to be a writer, you better come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And he certainly did. But, you know, the other thing about being envious about having, I wish I'd written this book. If you had, you wouldn't be able to read it because you would have written it. And you would have not had that wonderful experience of reading it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we adore, is the reading of it.
That's true.
You
and
mean
I think
as distinct from what we have as writers when we're reading it going, this is rubbish.
Of our own work.
Of our own work, I mean,
that's right.
sorry. You know.
I had something to respond to you, but it's disappeared from my brain now.
It'll come back.
It will. There was just something about inspiration there, I think, though, too. I mean, there's a competitiveness, I think, that writers have, particularly when we read other people's works that we think are really great. And there's obviously the competition that comes from publishing, which is kind of a bit separate, I think, to the creative stuff. Can these envious feelings that we sometimes have when we read works inspire us? Like, can this be productive, do you think?
I'm thinking of Somerset Maugham, and he had a lacerating wit, and he directed it to, I'm not an expert with these microphones, directed to Hugh Walpole, but his jealousy inspired him to write one of his most popular books, Cakes and Ale, and there's a character in there that is a social climbing opportunist, and Hugh Walpole recognised that character as himself. So in that sense, it was good for Somerset Maugham because it contributed to the sales of his book, because he was inspired by this jealousy that he had for Hugh Walpole, who was much more commercially successful than he was at the time. But the thing is, with Somerset Maugham, he still endures, and now no one's really actually heard of Hugh Walpole, although he's written excellent short stories.
It's interesting that you talk about writing jealousy into literature. As when I was researching for this panel, one of the things that I found was a quote by Howard Jacobson, who said when he launched his book, The Act of Love, "The first story I ever wrote described a bout of jealousy I had suffered. Writing about it, first comically and then not, was the only way I could gain any mastery of it. It was as though the shame associated with jealousy needed to be expiated in prose." Shane, have you ever written about jealousy, and did you find it cathartic?
No and yes.
Okay, right. There is, of course...
What about Clive James? The book of my enemy has been remanded and I am glad. It's a wonderful poem, isn't it?
It is. It's wonderful. I was going to say there's also a history of... it's not a history. Writers obviously have feuds, and we hear about them. The one that comes to mind is Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer, which actually did end up in a punch-on multiple times, I believe.
Can I say something about that?
Yes.
Because I met them both.
Oh, really?
Not at the same time. And I don't think, it's not really I wouldn't say it was a literary fight, because I think it was a sexual fight, because you had this Norman Mailer who was like, what are they called, those, men?
Alpha male.
Alpha male, that's right. And here we go with A. He's an alpha male. He was interested in boxing. He was interested in fucking. Yeah. He was interested in women. He was sort of, he was always sort of up for an argument. And Gore Vidal is sort of patrician and beautiful and tall, much taller than Norman Mailer. And, not interested in women really at all. Although he never liked to say he was gay. He just said he didn't like to be identified by where he orgasmed. So
you're saying...
what I'm saying is that they had, and also they were both really not that... I mean, they were better essayists than they were novelists. Or they both wanted to be novelists more than anything. So they had that sort of sense of that in common. But I thought that it was a class issue with them, and it was a sexual issue with them, because one of them was a fag and the other one hated fags.
Well,
that's what they would. This is the language that they would have used. I'm just quoting.
I definitely think there's something to be said about jealousy, and the act of being jealous says more about the jealous person than it does about the subject of their jealousy. I think there's something. I think it really is a personal thing. What I was going to say was... Didn't
you like what I said about them?
Do
you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. Disagree. But I do think it is interesting that it has kind of become known as a literary feud, and I do wonder. But
it's just because two writers are fighting doesn't make it a literary feud. It just could be two bulls in a paddock. That doesn't make them literary.
Okay. Well, what
do you think, Shane? You're a man.
About Norman Mailer.
And Gore.
Well, I tried to foment a literary feud at one point. I thought this would be good, because we really haven't got any in Australia, have we? Have there been any of there?
They're all around the Angry Penguins thing, and Max Harris, and the conservative poets up at the...
I would argue that we actually have many literary feuds. It's just that we don't talk about them. Should we
talk about them now?
well,
which ones are you referring to?
Hold that thought for a moment.
What about the one he was trying to foment?
Which was
I'd like to know what it was.
Well, I gave someone a really bad review for a really crappy book, and I thought he's not going to take this well. With a bit of luck, he'll come back at me. And I was thinking that, and then I call him up and explain what I was doing, because there was a I forget who it was. I think it was Frank Morehouse and another Sydney writer. And what they contrived to do was establish a literary correspondence for the purpose of selling it 30 years later. So they sat down and wrote to each other, every week, saying all sorts of vituperative things to each other, because it used to be when that writers could sell their correspondence. Famously, the Defence Force Academy would buy them by weight.
Connoisseurs.
You could flog them by the kilo. I'm not sure if they used them for target practice or what they were doing with them, but that all dried up about 15 years ago. This person I sort of rather hoped, John Birmingham. I rather hoped, because he's a bit punchy.
Yeah.
He's a bit punchy, but he
Also
took it the
likes
wrong.
martial
He
arts.
took it the wrong. He kind of took it the wrong way, and so.
Well, he thought you were serious, or...
Well, no, I was serious because it was a crap book,
But
I mean,
what way
anybody
do you
who
think he should have
repeatedly
taken
uses the expression "my fan base" in a book when he's talking about himself deserves what he's got coming. But the problem was that he for a little while he would kind of snipe at me in his blog. Little lines, and I thought, it's not good enough, I don't want to be, I don't want to be kind of, sort of little ball fired through a biro at me, I want this guy to have a go, and there was no real indication that he would have a go, and so it kind of, it sort of fell
Did you ever
flat.
meet him?
Well,
afterwards?
yes, I had met him after, but I didn't kind of put it to him that I was looking to call him out.
He didn't headbutt you behind out before going on television or something like Norman Mailer.
No. See, there's very few opportunities for that. So I thought it would be a good thing. I thought, Australia needs more of this. Particularly with the blokes. Because there's sort of,
Well,
it's one of the things we can do. Fight in the car park of the Writers' Festival.
Could liven the car park up a bit.
What are the ones that we've got? The secret ones?
Well, I don't know if I should say, but what I was going to talk about was that there is a kind of burgeoning tradition, of which I am now a part, of writers writing about their jealousy of other writers for their writing, and using that as a kind of catharsis. So what I was going to say before we started talking about Shane's attempts to generate a fight with John Birmingham, is that there are a number of essays floating around, and one of the most famous, I think, is Catherine Tchekovich's piece in Granta a few years ago, 2005, I think it was, where she writes this, it's very long, it's a very beautifully written essay about her jealousy of a man who ends up being her partner, who ends up being a very successful writer. Now, if most people haven't heard of Catherine Tchekovich, or not many people had until this essay came out, she's actually the partner of Jonathan Franzen. And so she's writing this essay about the man that she loves, who has become this massive literary success, who she's incredibly jealous of. And I think this is a really interesting phenomena. If you're an Overland subscriber, you might know earlier this year, we published an essay by me about my own jealousy of someone who was a student of mine when I was teaching at university, who then ended up going on to get a massive book deal, and me, who had not published my novel that I'd slaved over, was very, very jealous of this girl. We have made up. There is no fisticuffs in the car park of the Melbourne Writers' Festival for us, but she didn't even know about it, and she was very gracious about it. But I think it's really interesting that writers kind of go to, obviously they're writers, so they go to write in order to, work through things, but that there is this tradition or the beginning tradition of writing about their jealousy. So I was going to ask you, Ramona, what do you think about this? Do you think this is something that is... do you think this is good for the literary community, or do you think there are some things that just should be kept kind of indoors, under the carpet?
Well, I'm not a believer in keeping anything under the carpet. I'm a above carpet person, so I would not say that should be kept under the carpet. However, she said, putting on her glasses, the essay by Jonathan Franzen's partner Catherine Tchekovich, who I googled her to see who her partner was, because it was all, the writer. Is that how she?
The man.
The man. is interesting and telling, not so much for the self-exploration of jealousy, which is a classic narcissistic position of not understanding the limitations of her art, but for the sentence that says she's done everything she was supposed to do, meet the right people, attending the right parties. She's a product of that networking culture, which I'm laying at the feet of the creative writing university course. When you're supposed to be teaching people to write and taking cash for it, you also have to put in a few industry subjects. And this is what it was taught. And it didn't work because, you know, the thing is about writing is you have to write. And sometimes your partner is better than you. And just because you're writing and he's writing doesn't mean that you have a right to be published and he doesn't have, and you know, or equal to him. I just find it, you know, this is sort of a sad story that a lot of women who are with male artists too, who say, you know, I should be the one who's painting, but he's getting all the attention. And it can go the other way around. It could be two lesbian women living together, and one of them is, you know, if they're both doing the same gig, then one of them is possibly going to be more better at it than the other one. And you don't have a kind of right to be published. You don't have a right to be heard. It's not automatic because you've done a creative writing course and you've passed it and you've done really well, that you have a right to be published. It doesn't kind of... But
not all good writers get published, and a lot of bad writers get published, and I think has a lot to do with marketing. And I'm going back to Somerset Maugham, and he was quoted as saying, it's astonishing how people with so little talent can achieve so much. So there is that element of publicity and the marketing.
You know, if you've been, you know, famous on The Bachelorette, which I haven't seen, but I'm told tonight is the last.
It is. Thank you for being here and
I'm sure that if the Bachelorette lady gets, well, you know, somebody will say, look, I'll be a ghostwriter for your, you know, biography and autobiography, and she'll probably, you know, sell a bomb, but, you know, and be terribly successful in that. But, you know, who wants to write that?
I think what we're touching on here is something really important, which is that kind of fusion of literary, personal, creative, literary endeavour and publishing, which is obviously an industry which has its own goals and its own kind of benchmarks and things like that. And there's competition, you know, there's that, you know, internal, the competition with yourself to produce your best, to, you know, create work that is most meaningful to you. And then there's the competition in the marketplace, which I think is something separate. Shane, do you think this competition is productive?
Well, I think we're really talking about, we're not talking about jealousy of someone's writing, you know. I don't think that this, you know, how could you be jealous of Jonathan Franzen's writing? God, if I wrote like that, I'd, you know, put a plastic bag over my head for Christ's sake, you know. I mean, it's insufferable. You know, I mean, who out there has been trying to wade through this shit because you're supposed to? And you're supposed to because he is successful, you see, and that's the thing, I think. You know, it's not...
But some people love his books. That's why they buy them and they read the next one, Freedom, as well.
If you
do
did...
They?
Also, if
yes,
you...
Shane, they do.
If you did love his...
I am astonished. I am absolutely astonished. I am absolutely astonished. Surely you would find something better to do with your time than read a Jonathan Franzen novel.
So say Catherine, I take it on good faith maybe perhaps that Catherine Chekovich loves Franzen's writing as well as...
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's take that. But I think there's a thing about success. You see, you know, I mean, it is what you want when you're writing is for your book to be published and for it to find a readership.
Shouldn't you want to also write something that is meaningful and good in and of itself?
Oh, in the end, you would sell your soul as long as you got you know, someone published it, and a lot of people,
with that.
and a lot of people, you know, I think that's the truth of it. You know, that you because, you know, at least initially when you're starting out, you know, I mean, it's getting published. That's the thing, and then later on you might think, well, you know, I can improve, I can be better, and so on. But it's that success. So the people who I think, you know, shit me, for want of a better word. I mean, look, it's hard being green, as Graham used to say, but it's the people who get a massive readership for absolute, the Da Vinci Code or something like that. I mean, if you care about your work and you go into a bookshop and you read the first page of the Da Vinci Code, it's really difficult, I think, to have to even feel, good on you, Dan Brown, you condom good, It's even hard to feel that because it is so terrible.
I know, but there's a readership for that because people aren't discerning, like you and me.
Well,
they aren't. They read 50 Shades of Grey.
But they read Dan Brown, and then the books that were ejected have been published. So the next four booksellers, next bestsellers on the same list are Dan Brown books, and they're even worse, and they get worse and worse and worse. Now, you understand that this is a phenomenon that people are buying. They aren't really buying books. They're buying a kind of thing that's happening at the moment, with 50 Shades of Grey, or they're buying it out of curiosity or whatever. They're obviously in a lot of cases not people who would usually read. So, and you think,
well, that's a good thing.
Well, not necessarily.
Yes, it is.
Really, why is it necessarily?
Because they might pick up your book.
No, but they don't. They go and buy. It's like the Bryce Courtney. No, don't get me started here.
Shane Maloney, everybody is trying to start a feud with everybody.
It's a posthumous feud with Bryce.
Bryce Courtney. We're pretty safe with Bryce Courtney. Now, you go to a library and you see that there are, let's face it, older people who are borrowing Bryce Courtney books, and they can't wait for the next one. And you think, well, look, that's nice. Here's someone who's probably never really had an opportunity to read in their working life. Maybe they've been not a reader or not brought up as a reader or, whatever. And finally they're retired and they've decided to do a bit of reading. And so they've liked Bryce Courtney. But for fuck's sake, why don't you read someone else? It doesn't have to be me, but they queue up, And I've talked to librarians about this, they will wait for 6 months until one of the four copies at the library becomes available to them. Now, I think that, as you see in action here, what's going on is a sense of where you might regard it as jealousy of the writer's work. What animates to some extent this kind of feeling in some people is the sense that that people have a success, which is, and this is the kind of, the Gore Vidal line, whenever one of my friends has a success, a little something in me dies, and it's that sense that the other person doesn't deserve it as much as you do. And in a lot of cases, they don't.
What's this deserving thing, though?
I think though, like, again, there's commercial success, and we can envy that, and it's very straightforward to see. I think in a lot of cases when we're envying commercial success, we're envying money pouring in for a book that we thought was whether we thought it was good or not. But I wonder if in literature, in the literary community, writers conflate the two. Conflate envy of literary of envy of commercial success and envy of the talent of the creation of a piece of art which is transcendent in some respects, which is which affects a lot of people, which speaks to people, which people respond to. And I really think those two things are different. And I wonder how we can get through that. Like, is it? I don't think it's productive, or maybe it's productive to envy other people's commercial success. Does it make people try harder? Like, is this a positive thing for the community? Sonya, what do you think?
I'm thinking of one writer who has both commercial success and literary talent. I really enjoyed Elizabeth Gilbert's The Signature of All Things. I know she was lambasted for Eat, Pray, Love, but she really put a finger up when she with the Signature of All Things, because it was so beautifully researched, and the passages they glow like jewels, and I was in awe. I don't know if I felt jealous, but I was in awe of the ability to write such beautiful prose and create a character that you didn't want to say goodbye to. So, and she achieved commercial success, and that's a really beautiful combination, and I could see why writers would envy that. And Meg Wolitzer, she's a very good American writer, and she is only catapulted to fame with her book, The Interestings, and she's always written fantastic books. And again, I think it's the publicity machine. When people like Jonathan Franzen, they get the attention and their books keep selling, and then other lesser-known writers whose work is of a very high calibre are neglected. And that's why you see a bibliotherapist, because our job is to look out for the great writing, the neglected writers and translated works, and put together a prescription of books.
Do you have therapy for writers too who feel neglected?
I haven't come across that yet, but that is certainly something that we can cater for as bibliotherapists.
I don't know, when you see somebody who can express such the ineffable and move people and how did they do that? Sometimes you don't know the terrible traumas that person has been through, so that they do understand what it is to be a human being in this situation, and they, have, gnawed at themselves to find the words to say it, and you don't necessarily want to be in their shoes because you would have had to have lived their life, and it may not be something you'd swap to be able to produce those words. I mean, all you could do is write your own book and do it, because nobody else can write your book. Nobody. As well as you can.
One of the things my partner always says to me when I speak about jealousy and, I wish I'd written something like that, is he says, particularly when I used to talk about commercial success and envy about that, was, have you asked yourself, would you have wanted to write that book, like that particular book, in that way? Is that the book that you would have wanted to write? And it seems like a kind of easy question until you start thinking about it, because actually, sometimes you think, well, no, I wouldn't. I'm glad somebody else has written it, and I'm glad I've got to experience it, and that experience was amazing. But no, I wouldn't have wanted to write that book.
Like Helen Garner's This House of Grief is a fantastic book. I couldn't have written it. I wouldn't have wanted to write it. I couldn't have bared to sit in the court over all of that time listening to that case. I couldn't have bared to think about killing children and drowning children and what happened to them and what the evidence was. And I couldn't have bared, but I'm so grateful she did.
Parul Segal, who's the editor of I may not have pronounced that correctly, the New York Times Book Review, has a TED talk, which is up online and you can see. And a couple of the things that she says in it kind of relate to what we've just been talking about. It's about envy. But she said, when we feel jealous, we tell ourselves a story about other people's lives. This is part of the reason that she's like, well, literature and jealousy, the feeling, kind of go together and are really kind of compatible, and that's one of the reasons why. But another thing she says is, it trains us to look with intensity but not accuracy. What if jealousy is really just a matter of geometry, of where we allow ourselves to stand in relation to somebody else? I think there's something really striking about that idea of, the only way that, jealousy comes up because we are looking at a situation in a particular light. Shane, thoughts?
Well, I was thinking about the way critics sometimes approach books, and at least with some reviews that I've read, I've had the sense that what the reviewer is really saying is, this book isn't bad, but it's not as good as the book that I would have written if I had written this book, which I was planning to do until this writer came along and cruelled the pitch for me by getting in first.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's envy, isn't it? I wish I had that
No,
idea
it's
before
animus
you
and
did.
envy.
Sometimes when critics really lay in,
you just know.
You think you just know that they're, and I'm thinking here, the Michael Hoffman review in London Review of Books of Richard Flanagan's, whatever it is, Road to the North.
Narrow
to deep.
deep north.
Narrow, deep, long to where the Japs are, was so sort of mean-spirited and vicious that I thought there's something else. This says more about the reviewer, and I think there's a kind of, if you you're more likely to find the kind of envy located there, particularly if it's a review of something that's sort of slightly specialised, a historical subject or something like that. But you see it more generally. I think that's where we need to go looking for this kind of stuff, because writers, I find, are fairly reluctant to, because we kind of know what it's like to go through this,
What it took to get there.
What it took, and how kind of fragile we felt at certain times, and so it may not lead to sort of a more robust and sort of vigorous critical culture, but there's something, I think, kind of respectful of each other's feelings going on quite a lot of the time.
We might go to some questions. Does anybody have a burning desire to talk about jealousy with our panellists? Oh, there's a microphone.
I just wonder if any of the panellists have had the experience of being envied, in a public forum, or someone writing about their work and saying, exactly what you're saying about other people's work, and what that might have felt like, where they've stood back and said, wow, that's an interesting experience. That person, in that moment wishes they were me, or wishes that they'd had my thoughts, or put them down.
How would you know? If they would have just stood up and said that.
Yeah, or written it in a review, or
With social media.
public forum, or
now,
social
isn't it?
media. Or
I don't think I've had that experience.
No, I've been the person doing the opposite.
No, I haven't. It's probably happened to you quite a bit, Ramona, because of the range of things that you write about. But you sometimes find that someone's pinched something that you've written and sort of slipped it into their work. A kind of telling phrase, or no.
A telling phrase.
Or I don't know.
I mean, the English language isn't, we can't kind of say, that's
we
that's
can't.
my
But
telling phrase.
But you can go, well, wait a minute, that's... no, I'm not saying that you feel any great kind of, enormous sense of outrage, but you recognise that someone has, ever so slightly expropriated a bit of you for their own purposes.
I guess, look, I spent a long time interviewing writers, like years and years and years, and I think that it came out of admiration of their work and a wish to, try to understand what brought them to making this book, and, from all kinds of angles of, their history and their psychology and their reading and their research and their experience. And I think you can't do that work if you feel that they are competitors with you. And I think, I mean, you do hear it on the radio or on television sometimes, and you think, oh my God, it's so unedifying. Can the person interviewing please stop, trying to compete with the person who they're there to talk to? It's not about them, it's about the person that they're talking to. And I think it's probably conditioned me to just try and learn from people, learn from what I'm reading, learn from what I'm hearing, and as you say, not necessarily steal, that's a bit aggressive, but
Borrow.
But no, not even borrow, just learn, just for God's sake. Admire and learn and say, that's how they did that. And I wonder if I could ever do something like that, and then apply it. I mean, what could be easier?
So do you think that approach is potentially a way to combat jealousy?
Well, I just think it's just on another planet to jealousy. It can't live with planet jealousy, because you cannot have a conversation that's enlightening and elucidate things and learn. If you're sort of feeling that there's a big block in front of you which says, "What about me?"
I wonder if you guys
I've been spending a lot of time with my grandchildren lately. That's why I'm speaking like this.
Well, they do say envy does appear from, very young age. Sonya, what do you think about ways that we could potentially combat jealousy? I think everybody knows what it feels like, but what's the antidote?
Right, I suppose. Yeah, it's right. If you fuel that jealousy in other ways, use your creative gifts, your outlet creatively, and sublimate that negative energy into something positive. So that's why great writers are great. They use that creative energy to the good. It's like that Greek idea, the pathway, ekpedia, which means the pathway to self-knowledge, is the examination of the good and the beautiful. So if you're going to be a great writer, you have to be on that pathway, and it is about channeling that negative energy into something positive and creating your beautiful work. So
what a great word. Do we have a word in English like that?
No. Yeah.
A pathway to self-knowledge, did you say?
Yeah.
Do we have one like that?
Pathway to self-knowledge.
Yeah, just one word.
That's English.
No, I know that's English.
Oh, right.
I want one word like the Greeks have.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, it is. They came up with great ideas, the Greeks. Like bibliotherapy is a Greek word.
There's a German compound.
They and also libraries were revered as places of soul healing. So there's a lot of great things that came from classical Greece.
So we can also read.
And read, Biblia is book, So there is that. There was a reverence for great works of writing, and libraries were placed next to hospitals. So you go to a library for your psychic health, for your emotional health, and then you visit a hospital next door if you need your physical health. So they were aligned. The idea of libraries being restorative and necessary for our well-being.
I think that's an argument that we should be making more often, quite frankly. Does anybody else have a question? I wonder, since we're talking about reading as a way of possibly dealing with jealousy, have any of you read anything that you found particularly cathartic in this respect, or even just really striking representations of these feelings? I'm reminded of talking about literary industry as well as creativity of Robert Galbraith / J.K. Rowling's The Silkworm, which is all about a very jealous literary community, including a murder, but we won't go down that path.
People are always setting crime novels at the Edinburgh Writers' Festival, or the Edinburgh Festival, all these artists all in one place, everyone getting jealous about how many stars that they were given for the show, and it's obviously a ripe area for seething, isn't it?
The poets are the worst, of course, because the stakes are the lowest.
Well, that's right.
Oh no.
Do you think writers are creative? Do you think creative people are more susceptible to these feelings?
Well, I think any area where the bucks are small, and you're sitting alone at home or somewhere, and you're kind of doing your own head in because you're not sociable, and you're not having much fun, and you're doing it on your own, and nobody cares what you do.
Well, it is a very private act, writing, because it is solitary.
But nobody's actually making you. That's the whole thing. It's actually harder to go and work in a factory from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Stand up all day at Myers and the bathers department. Much harder than writing. I mean, writing is something you do because you've got an idea and you want to just sit there and work on it and do it. And if you're lucky enough to be able to organise it so that you can pay the rent and you just get some food, and You really are very lucky.
Takes a lot of courage, though. I'm going back to
it
Maloney.
doesn't really. It doesn't
to persist and to know and to.
It takes
to
courage
keep that
to
dream
look after
alive.
a disabled child. It doesn't take courage to actually do what you want to do and see if it works.
I think in every profession, though, there is a certain amount of discipline required and churn. And I mean, I don't know any. Perhaps you're the exception, Ramona. That any writer who would say that the hours that they sat at their desk working through their piece was fun.
It's not fun. Not always. No.
But I mean, I do
But it's
wonder.
self-imposed, not fun.
You have fun.
Just occasionally it can be fun, just like a moment. It can be fun, but not often. But it's self-imposed. That's what the thing. I mean, the best thing is to control your own work and control your own time. And that is, it's absolute. There's nothing better than that.
I guess where I was going to go with this, though, was that I do wonder if there is something to that solitary, the solitary nature of creation that pushes us towards this kind of this blowing up of situations in our heads so that we do become jealous of people. So we have this idea that, this person is, clearly they don't try, they churn out these books and they're amazing and they sell like hotcakes and yet they never seem to have a single problem, whereas I'm sitting at my desk working over this damn sentence again and again and again, I mean, again, maybe it's that question of geometry, of positioning, of telling yourself a story about somebody else's life or work or a process that is not necessarily accurate. But I wonder if writers are more susceptible to this because of these sorts of things. And I wonder if perhaps if that's true, a way through that would be to have a more collective sense of community, a more kind of congenial community that supports people and doesn't see each other as essentially competition. I wonder what your thoughts might be on that.
Well, I love the fact that everybody is buying the Rosie Project and the Rosie... What's the other Rosie one? The Rosie... Effect.
Yeah.
And every time, I look at the top 10 of Text, my publisher, and I say, thank God for Gran Simpson, because it means that, Text can afford to publish other things that are not going to sell that sort of fantastically, or Magda Zubanski, who's selling like a bomb now, and she's the most favourite person on television in Australia, and she's selling it, and the book is good, and I'm pleased because it means that the rest of us can just be working on our things, and we don't have to sell as many as that because they're keeping us all afloat.
Is then the thing that we shouldn't have to? The idea that we'd have to sell in order for our work to be valued and necessary in society, kind of then, like what you're saying is that actually it's not as important as being able to write the things that we want to write and the things that we think are meaningful, which sort of takes us full circle. So, from my perspective, I think that a literary community that values art for its own sake and has ways of supporting art, both financially and physically and, and socially, is a society that is going to have less jealousy. Shane, you look like you have
That's
something
utopia.
to say.
That utopian society.
Well, I don't think the truly deep down the motives of writers, really, bear much observation. They bear much consideration. It's a dirty business.
It's a dog-eat-dog world.
It's a dirty business.
Is it worse than the motivations of butchers who have shops in the same street?
Well, in terms of that, being nicer, I think we all surely, enjoy, if a work that we have got pleasure and satisfaction from finds a wider audience, this is a gladdening thing. If someone that we know who's worked for a while, and hard to be published and to write a book, succeeds with that book, we are kind of gladdened by this, that surely these are things that we. It's not like you're kind of in a little club, and if more than 10 people come to see the band, then you feel that they've sold out.
Don't you think that there's something fundamentally different about creative labour than there is about, say, menial labour, or so there's something fundamentally different, I think, about creating a piece of art, whether or not you then go on to commodify that, and being a butcher.
But you're talking about the market, aren't you?
I am, because I think that the market and our ideas about what great art is, and the feelings that we have about those things, they get conflated, I think. So, I think there is a difference between creating something, between envying somebody for their creative work and envying somebody's day job. Do you see what I mean?
But it is our day job. Right,
but I think part of the reason we become so invested in these things is because for a lot of people, it's not just a day job.
It's a night job as well.
It's something that, I think there would be a lot of writers who would quibble with the idea that they just do what they do for money. Maybe some of us do what we do for money, but a lot of writers won't ever make any money out of their work. So what then is the drive to keep writing?
Why are they jealous of anybody? You just need to do the best work that you can.
You want validation. That's why you want.
We want to know,
just give it to someone to read.
Our work is meaningful. I think we want to know that our work is meaningful and that our work will touch people and make a change in the world.
And we want people to read our books and think, "God, the author of that book is so clever and smart and probably highly sexually attractive and wise and funny and deep." That's why our names are on the cover. A really good book by someone,
wouldn't sell.
Isn't going to cut it.
Wouldn't do it for you, Shane.
On that note,
that's what I said about motives.
If there are no other questions, then I think that's pretty much all we have time for. Thank you to our wonderful panellists, Shane Maloney, Ramona Koval, and Sonya Tsakalakis.
And to you.
I'm Stephanie Convery. Yeah. I do not have a book with my name on it, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.